All right. Well, again, happy Memorial Day. Memorial Day is a day where we honor and mourn the U.S. personnel who died serving the United States Armed Forces. Do we have any veterans or anyone with losses in their family? Yeah. So at the beginning of May, Olivia and I traveled to Columbus, Ohio, to attend Mark's induction ceremony into the Ohio Military Hall of Fame. So Mark would be my father-in-law, Olivia's dad. There should be a picture in there, Sam, of that. Mark has spoken and preached here before, but for those of you who don't know, and you probably wouldn't because he doesn't speak about this, Mark was drafted into the Vietnam War when he was about 18, 19. He went over to Vietnam. And Mark doesn't speak about this at all. I've only personally heard him talk about it once or twice now. And before we got married, Olivia had only heard him talk about it once or twice before that in her whole upbringing, or his whole upbringing of her, I guess would be the right way to say that. So Mark is pretty private about this. If he's in town next time, I wouldn't just start asking him about this. But and I won't be sharing many of his stories to protect his privacy, but this particular one lives on the internet in the archives of the Ohio State Military Hall of Fame, so I felt like it was okay to share this. And I just want to read that. PFC Marcus G. Collins, United States Army Silver Star Medal. The citation reads, "For gallantry in action, Private First Class Collins distinguished himself by heroic actions on the 8th of January, 1970, while serving with Company A, 3rd Battalion, 25th Infantry in the Republic of Vietnam. While on a reconnaissance operation, elements of Company A came under intense enemy fire. Acting as radio and telephone operator, Private Collins continually exposed himself to heavy enemy sniper fire in order to collect and relay smoke grenades to the forward element. When the platoon sergeant had moved to the front, Private Collins took charge of the rear element and began to place a devastating base of suppressive fire on the enemy. Later in the day, Private Collins was responsible for destroying a machine gun position which had his platoon sergeant and 3 men pinned down. His valorous actions contributed immeasurably to the success of the mission. Private Collins' bravery, aggressiveness, and devotion to duty, which resulted in the award of Silver Star, are in keeping with the highest traditions of the military service and reflect great credit upon himself. In his unit, the 25th Infantry Division of the United States Army. Marcus G. Collins attained rank of Specialist 4 before leaving the service. Additional awards include the Bronze Star with V device. He was born and currently resides in Norwalk, Ohio." So this event in Columbus was to recognize the courageous acts that these soldiers committed while they were in active duty. And if you look at the bulletin for the program, I think there's a picture of that in there too. You'll notice Mark was one of 17 individuals who was recognized at this year's induction. You might also notice that next to half of the names, there are kind of 2 stars or 2 asterisks, which means that those were killed in the line of duty. So Mark's story was one of 17 that was read that day. And during each story, I'd say the most common theme was the repeating line in each one, which was acting with no regard for his own safety to help their squad. For example, the gentleman who was awarded right before Mark had a story where it was his first month in Vietnam. He was drafted as well. He was a medic, and he was traveling through the rice fields, so kind of open, and his group of jeeps was attacked from the nearby jungle. Many in his group were badly wounded, and they were stuck behind their jeeps that had been disabled. And I would imagine these would be very similar to like the jeep that Adam runs up here. And so this medic, it's his first month in Vietnam, and he has his crew or his squad pinned behind these jeeps, and he runs out across the field in the midst of enemy fire and ends up twice bringing his men back to safety. And on the second time, he was injured in that process. And after he was injured, what he did was he said, "I'm going to go again." And so he went that third time, and he was killed the third time going, trying to save every last man that he could. And so it was his brother who accepted his award right next to Mark. And so again, I think of this quote, acting with no regard for his own safety. He had no regard for his own safety. He was injured. Not only was he running across the field now, but he was injured running across the field. And I mean, I don't know what I would have done in that situation. But Jesus says in John 15:12 and 13, he says, "My command is this, love each other as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friend." And so I personally left this ceremony feeling inspired by these amazing acts of courage from these men. But if I'm honest, I also felt a bit underwhelmed at my own accomplishments and my drive and my own self-worth in the face of what these men went through and what the decisions that they made. What I do seems like, I mean, it's child's play. It's literal child's play. And so when I got home, Dad was back here. He was unloading the trailer, and I went over and I talked to him. And for those of you that don't know, Dad and I were both raised Mennonite, and pacifism flows pretty deeply in that Anabaptist core belief system. So growing up, if I would have, I'm very blessed that there has not been a war that I've been have to be drafted into. But had I likely would have been in the conscientious objector type of being raised. So I was almost raised as far away from that line of thinking as you almost possibly could be. And what I said to my dad was, "Dad, I know what success looks like in the life that I'm living right now. I know what success looks like when I look at you, or when I look at somebody else. I can see what that success, I can see you are a successful person in this society. I know that I can roll with the punches at work, and I can be ambitious. And in the areas that I'm given authority, I can lead with a certain aptitude based on my own experience. I'm confident in that. If you ask me to do something, I can confidently tell you, for the most part, yes, I can do it, or yes, I will figure it out." But I told him when listening to those stories, I don't know how I would react in war. I don't. I have no frame of reference for that. I don't know if I would be the guy crying in the corner or leading from the front line. I don't. We have examples of all of these romanticized warriors in the Bible. I'm thinking in particular of David's mighty men. 2 Samuel 23. And I'm going to read the one excerpt from it. And I'm going to butcher all of these names, but I have a request. If Justin could sometime do another one on these. I think you did one years ago. But if you could do another one on these, I think it would be good. But as I was reading through this, the similarities or the stories here are strikingly similar to the 17 stories of those accolades that were given in this Hall of Fame address. Obviously, there are grenades and machine guns instead of spears and maces, but the type and the way of remembrance was very similar. So I just want to read these in 2 Samuel. David's mighty warriors. These are the names of David's mighty warriors. And I'm going to skip some of these names. Joseph, was the chief of the three. He raised his spear against 800 men, whom he killed in one encounter. Next to him was Eleazar. As one of the three mighty warriors, he was with David when they taunted the Philistines gathered for battle. Then the Israelites retreated, but Eleazar stood his ground and struck down the Philistines till his hand grew tired and froze to the sword. Try to put yourself in these guys' positions if you can. I don't know how many of you guys have done construction, but how many of you have hammered until your hand was frozen?
Just yesterday.
Yeah. So you know the feeling. Now imagine that plus life or death. The Lord brought about a great victory that day. The troops returned to Eleazar, but the troops only returned to strip the dead. Next to him was Shammah, son of Agi, the Harite. When the Philistines banded together at the place where there was a field of lentils, Israel's troops fled from them, but Shammah took his stand in the middle of the field. He defended it and struck the Philistines down, and the Lord brought about a great victory. During the harvest time, 3 of the 30 chief warriors came down to David at the cave while a band of Philistines was encamped in the valley. At that time, David was in the stronghold and the Philistine garrison was at Bethlehem. David longed for water and said, "Oh, that someone would get me a drink of water from the well near the gate of Bethlehem." So the 3 mighty warriors broke through the Philistine lines, drew water from the well near the gate of Bethlehem, and carried it back to David. But he refused to drink it. Instead, he poured it out before the Lord. "Far be it from me, Lord, to do this," he said. "Is it not the blood of men who went at the risk of their lives?" And David would not drink it. Such were the exploits of the 3 mighty warriors. Abishai, the brother of Joab, was chief of the 3. He raised his spear against 300 men whom he killed, and so he became famous as the 3. Was he not held in greater honor than the 3? He became their commander, even though he was not included among them. Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, a valiant fighter, performed great exploits. He struck down Moab's 2 mightiest warriors. He also went down into a pit on a snowy day and killed a lion. And he struck down a huge Egyptian. Although the Egyptian had a spear in his hand, Benaiah went against him with a club. He snatched the spear from the Egyptian's hand and killed him with his own spear. Such were the exploits of Benaiah. He too was as famous as the 3 mighty warriors. He was held in greater honor than any of the 30. But he was not included among the 3. And David put him in charge of his bodyguard. So I also think of Gideon, and I think of the 300 men and their defeat against the Midianites. And these stories, and there are many more throughout the Old Testament, incredible stories of a man's faith in God and God's faithfulness to his children. But someone was still swinging the swords, and someone was still getting bloody. I don't believe there's a greater test of faith in God than to be one of the 300 going into battle against 30,000. To believe that God will be victorious, but to know that you're still going to be the one swinging the sword. To believe and have faith that God will protect you, but to know that you still must block your opponent's strike. Again, I want to go back to what Jesus said in John 15, 12 and 13. "My command is this, love each other as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friend." And I want to dig just a little bit deeper into what it means to lay down one's life. And I think most of us have the idea of laying down your life kind of like a candle, and that it's either there or it's not. It's being snuffed out. It's instantaneous when someone loses their life. There 1 minute and gone the next. But I think the implication of one's life is actually much bigger and deeper than that. And for example, here's the example of one young boy from Norwalk, what the implications of him giving his life would have ended up with or could have ended up with. If Mark would have died on that mission in 1970, he wouldn't have met Barb. And if he hadn't met Barb, Olivia wouldn't be here. And if Olivia wasn't here, I wouldn't have married her. And if I wasn't married to her, I might not have moved back home. And if I hadn't moved back home, Dad might have not had an idea for this warehouse. And if we didn't have this warehouse, we might not be having Warehouse Church together this morning or over the past 5 years. And so you can see that a life ended early is more than just a tragedy for one person. It affects and can affect family and friends, past, present, and future. And so when Jesus says to lay down your life for your friend is the greatest love, he is talking about that not as the instant that your life gives out, but in the deepest way of all the future and potential things that you may do in that life. He's setting the stage in this verse, and he's setting our understanding for his greatest show of love for us. He wants us to understand how great his show of love for us, his sacrifice on the cross. I mentioned that I know what success looks like in my day-to-day life with my work and my friends. I feel confident in that. I know how I should act. I know how I should react. I mentioned that I don't know how I would react in war. And I hope I don't have to. I don't know if I would cry in the corner or lead from the front. But I do know that our fight is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms, Ephesians 6:12. We are all in a war. And I know that God has given us a roadmap on what success looks like in our battles, day to day. So to end today, I would like to read Jesus' teaching of the vine and the branches, where he calls us to remain in him and bear fruit for the world to see. He says it much better than I do, so read this. Hear Jesus' words. John 15. I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does not bear fruit he prunes, so that it will be even more fruitful. You are already clean because of the word I have spoken to you. Remain in me as I also remain in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. If you do not remain in me, you are like a branch that is thrown away and withers. Such branches are picked up, thrown into the fire, and burned. If you remain in me and my words remain in you, ask whatever you wish, and it will be done for you. This is to my Father's glory, that you bear much fruit, showing yourselves to be my disciples. As the Father has loved me, so I have loved you. Now, remain in my love. If you keep my commandments, you will remain in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and remain in his love. I've told you this so that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be complete. My command is this: love each other as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friend. You are my friends if you do what I command. I no longer call you servants, because a servant does not know his master's business. Instead, I have called you friends, for everything that I learned from my Father, I have made known to you. You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you so that you might go and bear fruit that will last, and so that whatever you ask in the name of the Father, in my name, the Father will give you. This is my command. Love each other. Let's pray.